Hey, before we dive in, a quick heads up. This series is called Validating the BPD Life, and that's exactly what it's here to do. Validate the experience of living with borderline personality disorder, hopefully making you feel a little less alone. That said, if you don't have BPD, there's still value here, especially if you've loved or currently love someone who does. But fair warning, we'll be talking about some heavy stuff. Self-harm, self-destructive behavior, hospitalizations, and a lot of emotional pain. You might feel grief, guilt, anger, rage, shame, or confusion while watching. And if you do, that makes sense. Don't judge yourself for feeling anything. Don't shame yourself for being triggered. Emotions show up for a reason, even if you don't know that reason right away. If it helps, try saying, "It makes sense I'd feel this way after everything I've been through." And if you've ever been hospitalized or felt like you were losing your mind, I wrote a book about my own experience at a psych ward, and you can grab it at the link right here. Or here. To be honest, I'm not sure where I'm going to put it, so I'm just going to say grab it. It supports the work I do and might help you feel a little less lonely on this journey. All right, without further delay and nothing more to say, buckle up, Buttercup. It is time to walk the middle path towards common humanity and a wise mind. For a long time, I lived with shame like it was a constant shadow. It was the voice that told me, "You're unworthy of love. You're broken beyond repair. You'll always mess everything up. You're too much or not enough." And what made shame even harder to carry was that it wasn't just mine to bear. I internalized the shame that others tried to put on me. Growing up in a very moralistic, judgmental, conservative, evangelical Christian environment, I was taught that who I was inherently flawed. I was expected to be perfect, to follow rigid rules, and to always live up to others' expectations, especially when it comes to love, sex, and behavior. There was little space for grace or mistakes. Anything less than perfection felt like an egregious sin. And when I began to struggle with my BPD, the shame felt unbearable. I'd internalize any hurt or rejection from others as proof that I was bad, wrong, unworthy of love. This compounded the guilt and shame I already felt about my emotional responses and behavior. The more I was told I was wrong or bad for simply existing and feeling deeply, the more I believed that maybe I was beyond saving. Here's the thing I've learned through DBT and self-examination. Shame is not who I am. I am allowed to feel it, and it does not define me. The more I practiced radical acceptance and self-validation, the more I began to separate myself from the shame I carried from others' judgment. The shame was theirs to project onto me. It was not mine to keep. This journey isn't easy, and I'm still working through it. And I've come to realize that my value isn't contingent on what anyone else thinks of me, or the rules they place on me. Let's talk about guilt. Guilt is a tricky feeling, especially when you've been taught that any wrong action is a reflection of your moral failure. In my upbringing, guilt was often the weapon used to keep people in line. If I made a mistake, I was bad. If I let someone down, it was because I was unworthy of grace. These ideas burrowed deep in my mind, and when I made mistakes, the guilt became overwhelming. When I hurt others, whether intentionally or unintentionally, guilt was natural. But what made it even harder was that I internalized it to an unhealthy degree. I was taught to feel guilt and shame as punishment, and it became intertwined with my BPD, making me feel like I was beyond redemption. It wasn't just guilt, it was guilt combined with self-hate and shame. And in those moments, it was hard to differentiate between feeling remorseful for my actions and thinking that I was inherently unworthy because of them. Thankfully, through DBT and other work, I learned that guilt is a response to actions, not an indictment of my character. It's an emotion that can guide me towards making things right, and it doesn't define my worth. When I feel guilt, I remind myself that it's not about being a bad person, but rather about taking responsibility for something I've done that doesn't align with my values. First thing I want to do is acknowledge the guilt. I tell myself I feel guilty because I hurt someone, and that's a natural response. Then I make amends. If it's possible, I apologize or take steps to correct the situation. Then I release the guilt. Once I've made amends, I practice forgiveness, both for myself and others. It's still a process, and I'm still learning to separate my guilt from my shame, and I've started to believe that my mistakes don't define me. Now let's talk about self-hate. Self-hate was a constant companion in my life. Growing up in a community where love was often conditional and failure was seen as a moral flaw, I began to believe that if I wasn't perfect, I was inherently bad. That meant any emotional dysregulation, any outburst, any mistakes, I would spiral into self-loathing. With BPD, those feelings were amplified, making it even harder to believe I was worthy of love. When others rejected me or hurt me, I internalized it as proof that I was bad. When I was told my emotional responses were too much, too loud, or too overwhelming, I believed I was just broken beyond repair. And that voice of self-hate became deafening, like it would never stop. And here's the part I'm learning through DBT and continuing self-work. I don't have to hate myself anymore. I can make mistakes and still be worthy of love. I'm not a product of my past mistakes or others' judgments. I'm allowed to be flawed and still worthy of healing, of growth, and of self-compassion. Self-hate does not have to be permanent. I still struggle with it, and when it arises, I now have the tools to challenge it. I ask myself, is this how I would speak to someone I love? Is this how I would speak to a friend? And the answer is always no. I'm learning that self-compassion is a practice, and every time I practice it, I'm slowly rewriting the narrative I once believed about myself. Now, how do we unlearn it all? I think one of the most difficult things for someone like me to untangle is how deeply I internalize the hurt I've received from others, especially when it's compounded by BPD. The feeling of being too much or too sensitive becomes a double-edged sword. On one hand, I internalize it, thinking that somehow I am unworthy. On the other, I feel anger and resentment toward those who have hurt me. But I am too afraid to speak up or even defend myself because I've been conditioned to believe that I am the one at fault. Growing up in a moralistic, judgmental environment where everything was viewed through a lens of perfection, I began to equate my worth with my ability to adhere to rigid, impossible standards. When I made mistakes, I believed that I was a failure, not just as a person, but as a Christian. When I hurt others or when I didn't meet expectations, the internalized shame was suffocating. Through continued self-work in DBT, I'm unlearning all of this. I'm learning that the voices of those who judged me don't define who I am today. I am not a product of their expectations, and I am not a product of my past mistakes. And most importantly, I am worthy of love, regardless of the hurt I've experienced or caused. I'll never forget the day I realized I didn't need to carry the weight of everyone else's expectations anymore. I'm still working on separating my identity from the shame and guilt of the past, and every day I get closer to that goal. It's not about just surviving anymore. It's about thriving. And that starts with accepting myself, flaws and all, and treating myself with the kindness and compassion that I so often give to others. If you're struggling with this, whether it's the shame, the guilt, the self-hate, especially compounded by BPD, I'm right there with you. It's not easy, and DBT has helped me build a foundation that allows me to continue moving toward a life worth living. And that means you can too. You are not the sum of your mistakes, nor the sum of others' judgments. You are worthy of healing and growth. You are worthy of love.